The NBA playoffs are in full swing, but unfortunately our favorite team, the Los Angeles Lakers, are not taking part for the fourth straight year. That means in Lakers land, we are looking ahead to next season, and today I've got Alex Kennedy of Hoops Hype here to help me figure out how the Lakers can land themselves a superstar. My name is Trevor Lane, and this is CourtCast by Lakers Nation. Today I've got Alex Kennedy of hoopshype.com here to help us break down the Lakers offseason and what's to come. Alex, thanks so much, as always, for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, so the NBA playoffs are in full swing. Unfortunately, the Lakers are not part of it, but still, so far, it's been a pretty exciting playoffs this year, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of close series. I think if you look in the Eastern Conference right now, really every team has some question marks. If you look at the top, especially, there's been a lot of questions about some of the contenders. Cleveland, their defense has left a lot to be desired. You look at Boston, their early struggles. Toronto obviously dropped a game early on. So, I mean, I think you look at those series and they're very competitive. And then out west, there have been some fun series as well. I think LA, Utah is interesting even after the Rudy Gobert injury early on. I'm curious to see what happens with that. And then, there's been other series out there too. So, I mean, early on, there's been a lot of fun, close series. So that's really all you can ask for. This is the time of year when we get to watch some great basketball again. So it's been a lot of fun.
For a season where everybody went into it just expecting it to be Golden State in the West and Cleveland in the East and nobody else really mattering, it's actually been a pretty fun NBA season. I mean, Lakers fans may not really agree with that, but for the most part, it's been a pretty fun NBA season overall. So these playoffs are falling right in line with what's been a pretty enjoyable year to watch, or at least I think so.
Yeah, I agree. I think initially everyone thought, like you said, Cleveland, Golden State, another rematch. But I think you look at the East right now, and if you're a team like Washington or, one of these other top seeds, I think, a team that's just getting hot at the right time, I think you have to look at the conference and think, okay, we actually may have a shot here to advance and go deeper than expected. Maybe surprise some people. Maybe they can catch a team like Cleveland off guard and kind of surprise everyone and be able to make it to the finals, or at least give them a tough series. They look at the Western Conference right now. San Antonio, obviously they're going to be around. Golden State is still extremely talented on paper, and we've seen when they're healthy, and they're very good, obviously. So right. I still think they're the team that's going to come out of the West. But San Antonio is playing great basketball too. I think the East is going to be more interesting, but certainly we could see a different finals matchup, and I think that would be exciting for a lot of fans.
Yeah, it definitely would. It would certainly be a surprise. And, one thing about watching the playoffs is that it always becomes apparent which teams have superstars and which teams don't. I mean, we've seen guys like Jimmy Butler go off, and he's been able to raise his game to another level. Of course, James Harden has been playing great. Kawhi Leonard, all these guys have been playing phenomenal basketball. I mean, we can't forget LeBron James. I mean, he can just take over games just about whenever he wants. And it throws into contrast the Lakers, who right now are sitting without a superstar. And Magic Johnson recently said that the Lakers' plan for this offseason is to try to get a superstar. That Los Angeles has always been built around superstars, and so that's their goal, is to go out and find a superstar. Are you in agreement with this? Do you think that's the right strategy for them at this point, or is it too soon for them to try to make that kind of a jump?
Well, I think you always want to have that as a goal. If you can land a superstar, then you have to go do it. Whether it's in a trade, a guy like Paul George has been mentioned obviously as a possibility for LA, just because some people have said that he has his eyes on the Lakers down the road, and if he's unhappy and becomes available during the offseason, then I think that's certainly something you have to look at. If you're Rob Pelinka, Magic Johnson, I think you have to look at that. In free agency, it's going to be really tough. As you mentioned, it could be too soon. I'm not sure any of those stars that are available in free agency this summer look at LA and think about leaving their current team or passing up on another situation to go to a team like LA. That's still rebuilding and trying to figure out what their core is. So I think that's going to be difficult, trying to get a guy like that in free agency. But I think it's something you have to consider in a trade for sure. I mean, and then if you land that first star, then we've seen that others will come, especially if you're in a big market like LA. So I do think that acquiring a star is the right mindset to have entering every offseason, really, especially if you're a big market. Because once you have that first star, other stars will look at you and take you more seriously in free agency. We've seen in the NBA, you really can't land other stars without having one. It seems like that's the case. That's why you have so few contenders being discussed.
Right. It's the Field of Dreams effect. You get if you build it, they will come, right?
Right.
So you have to have that foundation in place for a star to really come to the Lakers or any team that's trying to get one. And looking at the free agents this year, I mean, I think you're on the money. I don't see any of them picking the Lakers in free agency. You've got Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. Don't think they're going anywhere. Chris Paul, if he does leave the Clippers, I certainly don't think he's just jumping across the hallway to go to the Lakers. Same thing with Blake Griffin. And then you've got a next tier of guys like Gordon Hayward and Paul Millsap and Kyle Lowry. Well, Millsap and Lowry are both into their 30s. They're probably going to be looking to win. Hayward, I think I'd imagine he's either going to Boston or he's gonna stay with Utah. So I don't really see anybody heading to the Lakers in free agency, at least any big stars. But this whole concept of potentially trading for somebody, and of course Paul George is the name that keeps coming up, is interesting. But I do have some hesitation here, and I kind of want to bounce this off you. I see some similarities between the Lakers trying to trade for Paul George this summer when he's going to be a free agent the following summer to back when the New York Knicks traded for Carmelo Anthony, knowing that he was going to be a free agent shortly. They were confident they could keep him, but they gave up a lot to get him. And because they did that, once they landed Carmelo, they didn't really have the trade assets they needed to sort of build a team around him. They were sort of stuck with what they've got. And so my fear is that the Lakers will give up too much to get a guy like Paul George and then find themselves stuck without many assets to build a team around him. Is that a legitimate concern, or do you think you just go for the superstar period and that's what you do?
I think it's a real concern. I do think that you still try to go after the star player, but it certainly has to be something you keep in mind and at least have in the back of your mind. You'd obviously want to talk to George and his camp and get a commitment from him so that he wants to be there long term and see if he's okay with the trade package that's going out too. Because the last thing you want to do is put together a trade package and deal certain guys for Paul George, and then suddenly Paul George looks at the roster and doesn't want to be there anymore. That's the last thing you want. So certainly Los Angeles is a huge factor, and the Lakers' legacy, and he's talked about loving Magic Johnson and stuff like that. So those things obviously help too, but you don't want to part ways with certain assets that he likes for the future either. So that's obviously something that has to be discussed after a trade's worked out and all that. But if he does want to come there and there is a deal there to be had, then you certainly want to have his camp involved. But I do think that you have to be kind of worried about moving away a ton of pieces to get a guy like Paul George, then not being able to put talent around him. But at the same time, if you are moving away a bunch of different pieces and getting a guy like George this summer, and if you can do it, maybe around the draft, then suddenly you're looking at some of these free agents and you have a very different scenario. We're not talking about the same Lakers roster that we just are looking at, not looking at the same, salary cap figures. We're looking at, a Lakers roster that, maybe could be attractive to some of these free agents all of a sudden. If you're in LA, you have one star in Paul George. Again, if you have that first one, you never know who's going to be interested. So I think that's where you have to. I think you have to go after a guy like that if you can get him. Paul George is one of the best players in the NBA. I think he still has room to improve his game. He's been fantastic in the second half of this season and in the playoffs. It's hard to pass on a guy like that, even if you have to give up some assets. And then the hope is that you can just put talent around him in free agency and or through the draft or making other trades. But certainly it has to be something you keep in mind because you don't want to gut your roster and then be stuck kind of in the middle. That's the worst place to be in the NBA.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to be the proverbial treadmill team where you're just stuck and you're not bad enough to get good and you're not good enough to win. And we've seen a number of teams that got stuck in that position. I mean, that's what spurred the 76ers to start their whole hinky fueled tank fest that we saw them go through, the whole trust the process era that they're still in. I mean, it was because they were a treadmill team for so long that was just kind of stuck in one spot. So they have to be careful there. But you do bring up a great point. I mean, if they do land Paul George, I mean, hypothetically, if they do land Paul George, then suddenly you've got one player in place, and then maybe a guy like, say, Lowry or Millsap, or which we know the Lakers went after Millsap last year before the trade deadline. Some of these other guys may actually be interested in coming over to Los Angeles. So it does sort of change the entire ballgame for the Lakers, and I think you give Magic Johnson and Rob Pelinka a little bit of ammunition to work with when they go into those free agent meetings, because now they really have that big draw. Plus, I think that's going to be a great duo in free agent meetings. I mean, that's sort of an outside perspective. Have you heard anything around the league about, how players might perceive Magic and Pelinka in charge?
Yeah, I mean, I think having Magic Johnson is huge because so many players respect what he did, and they not only that, but he's very charismatic as well, and I think he's a great guy to have in a pitch meeting and selling your team. So I think it makes a lot of sense what they did. And then Rob Pelinka is very respected. I'm actually doing a video for Hoops Hype pretty soon where I'm talking to other agents about the Pelinka relationship, because that's always kind of weird. I know there's a lot of times where an agent is competing with tons of other agents, and then suddenly you're an executive and you have to interact with agents whenever you're trying to sign players, and that can be kind of strange. And then how he's perceived among executives around the league is important too, and I think he's very respected. So certainly I think the Lakers did a good job in picking the people in charge. That's very important moving forward as they try to make one of these stars interested, whether it's a free agent or a trade target. Having a guy like Magic Johnson and then having a guy like Pelinka, who I think is going to do a really good job, is definitely it makes it much easier, I think, going forward.
Yeah, he's got that experience from being an agent and all that, but I think that the video that you're talking about should be really interesting because it certainly could be awkward. I mean, the agent game is just about as competitive as NBA players are with each other, right? I mean, agents compete with each other for clients all the time, and so now you've got these guys that Rob Pelinka was competing with on a daily basis, and now he has to work alongside them. I mean, that has to be kind of a weird situation, right? I'm assuming that's probably going to be the bulk of what you're talking about in this video.
Yeah, I mean, the adjustment. We saw Bob Myers go through that when he took over the Warriors job. And, he obviously, whenever you're an agent and you take it over an executive job, you do have an advantage because you have relationships with the players that you represented. They trust you. They, are going to listen to you whenever you pitch them on something or, have cap space potentially. That's obviously a huge advantage. But whenever you do have to sit down and talk to other agents and negotiate with them, that can be really weird because I'm not talking about Pelinka specifically here. I honestly don't know how he's perceived among other agents. I'm, still working on that video, but right. It could be very awkward because in the agent game, like you said, it is so competitive and there's just so much stuff that happens that I think can be viewed as somewhat dirty. There's a lot of like poaching clients and stealing clients, and even if you don't poach a guy, it can be very heated and intense whenever guys are making their decision out of college or entering free agency when they change agents sometimes. So it could be very awkward in negotiations. Certainly you have to think that agents would put that aside and represent their client to the best of their ability, but I think that it definitely will have an impact, and I'm curious to see what that impact is.
Yeah, that's definitely something to keep an eye on, and it's one of those things that we may have to read between the lines a little bit with because it's the type of situation that is more kind of behind the scenes, and so it's going to be interesting to see what actually does surface regarding Rob Pelinka's ability to work with these other agents. I'm not too concerned about it. I think he's going to do a fine job, but still, should be interesting nonetheless. Now, if the Lakers do go ahead and pursue a trade for a superstar level player, whether that's Paul George or Jimmy Butler or somebody else whose name hasn't really been making the rounds, looking at the Lakers roster and let's for the moment let's cross our fingers and say that they do actually keep their first round pick this year, which which I think gives them a lot more ammunition to head into the offseason with. Of course, they only have about a 47% chance of keeping that pick. But for right now, we'll say that the basketball gods smiled upon the Lakers and they keep it. So all that being considered, is there anything on the Lakers roster, any assets or anything that you would be hesitant to move if you're Magic Johnson or Rob Pelinka?
Well, I have a hard time looking at the Lakers roster and saying anyone's untouchable. And it's not because I, don't have respect for the players in the Lakers roster. I'm someone that never likes to use the word untouchable unless it's a guy that you just know you're absolutely not going to trade. I think there's very few guys that you deem untouchable whenever you're, a rebuilding team. And especially when you're in talks to potentially acquire a superstar player, if they are trying to make a trade for a guy like Paul George, or if another superstar becomes available, then I don't think you can enter any of these talks and say one of these guys on the roster is untouchable. I mean, I guess maybe the closest a guy would come would be a guy like Brandon Ingram to being untouchable, just because he's so young and has so much potential, and they just used a high pick on him. I know that was something that was brought up during the DeMarcus Cousins talks, and
right.
That may have been one of the reasons why this new regime's in place. So you never know. Maybe they view him differently. Maybe they view a guy like D'Angelo Russell as untouchable. You really don't know. And I'm curious to see whenever they start having trade talks that pick up in the offseason, if they're willing to move that pick, if they're willing to, if they land it, if they're willing to move all these young players, or if there is a guy that they're leaning toward keeping and not moving. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Is there anyone that you would kind of deem untouchable right now?
I talked about this a little bit with Corey Hansford and Serena Winters from Lakers Nation on our last show. Corey basically said that he wouldn't trade Ingram for anybody that isn't like a Kawhi Leonard level player, like one of those top tier guys, because of what we saw from Ingram towards the end of the season, and I agree with that to a point. I think there's definitely some value in knowing what you have. That so many of these young players, we just don't know for sure what they're going to be. Ingram has a lot of potential, showed a lot down the stretch. I mean, the stats didn't really reflect what the eye test showed on Ingram when you looked at how much his game has changed. If you're somebody who's been really, really watching him, the leaps forward that he made were really impressive down the stretch of the season. And then you've got a guy like D'Angelo Russell, who can also look absolutely phenomenal, but he's just not consistent just yet. And so it's, like you said, it's hard to say any of these guys are really untouchable, and largely it's because you don't know what these guys are. We don't know what they're going to become. We don't know if D'Angelo Russell is going to become an all-star. We don't know if Ingram is going to blossom into a superstar. I mean, they're all so young, whereas a guy like George, a guy like Jimmy Butler, or whoever else might be out there, you already know what they are. You're getting that quality from them. So it's tough, and you know what? I also see the other side of it, where from a fan perspective, you've been watching these guys and you become invested in them as you're watching them improve and you're watching them struggle and work so hard. I mean, I think Lakers fans, even though we were losing our minds over the Lakers win streak at the end of the season because they were sort of exploding the tank, seeing D'Angelo Russell hit that 3-pointer at the buzzer in the last game he played, the same day that his grandmother passed away, and he runs into the stands and he's hugging his family and all that kind of stuff. It's that type of stuff that makes you really attached to some of these players, and you see them overcome personal struggles, and it's hard to say, well I'm okay with trading this guy or trading that guy. It's tough to see him go, and I think that's just part of watching these guys over time. But man, I mean, if you're Magic Johnson or if you're Rob Pelinka, that's a tough spot to be in, to say, okay, I'm going to give up whatever potential Brandon Ingram has, and I'm going to bring in this other guy who we know is really, really good right now. It's still a tough call. I mean, it's not easy. That's why they're in the spot that they're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're an executive, I think it's even harder because you see everything going on behind the scenes too, and
right.
You have personal relationships with these guys. I know some executives try to stay a little bit removed so that they can make those tough calls, but it definitely factors in. And when you're seeing a young guy like Brandon Ingram, develop behind the scenes and get better throughout the entire season, and especially whenever this front office starts making their own draft picks too, and they have their guys in place that they've kind of seen from the start, and selected them and then watched them improve and enter the league, and that's their guy that they picked. That's certainly a difficult position to be in, and moving that guy is not easy. And I think fans sometimes forget that it's not like going on 2K or in fantasy basketball just
Right.
clicking and trading a guy. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes involved too. So it's definitely a tough decision. One thing I think that's interesting is if I'm a team right now, if you can't get a guy like Paul George, let's say, and then, you're starting to see that maybe a guy like Paul George is going to cost you too much, or maybe he's not available because Indiana's, holding on to him or whatever, part of me is wondering, do you just go young and just try to get as many young guys as possible? Because, if you look at Golden State right now, with the roster they have, and you look at, a team that's rebuilding, you have to look at, can you win a championship? I think that has to be the ultimate goal if you're a team and you're trying to build. If you can, even if you can get a number 2 seed or number 3 seed in the Western Conference, does that matter? Can you beat Golden State? I'm wondering what some of these teams are going to do that are kind of in the middle or have a young core. I think some teams may just, punt on the next 3, 4, 5 years and say, Golden State's a super team right now. I'm not sure we can beat them. There's other contenders that are very talented that have multiple stars as well outside of Golden State, which, is ridiculously talented. I'm wondering if you maybe go the younger route and just stockpile young guys and say, let's wait for that team to break up and then we're going to enter our prime. You know what I mean? I think that's tempting if you're an executive, especially if some of these other moves don't work out.
Yeah, that's another great point, because if you look at what teams are doing right now, and you look at these teams that are going to have to play like the Golden States or San Antonio or Cleveland or those top teams, it's the right time to be rebuilding. Because ideally, as your young players grow, when they're in their prime, that's when Golden State and those teams will finally fall off. Of course, the Spurs may never fall off because they've been consistent for about 20 years now.
Yeah.
But these other top teams should be starting to come back down as age hits them and all that kind of stuff. So it is kind of a good time to be rebuilding. And then if you're a team like the Lakers, though, where fans are expecting the playoffs and fans are expecting greatness and everything, it's hard to sort of say, oh, well, we're going to take our foot off the gas pedal for the next few years and we're just going to build from the ground up. Meanwhile, the fan base is getting impatient and you've got expectations upon you to improve every year. And so you've got that aspect too, where teams don't want to be stuck rebuilding for too long. But then again, I think you're right that you've got some teams that are so strong at the top right now that really building up a team is a tough proposition. You'd have to find a way to bring in some of the top players in the league, and doing that is never easy. It's always a difficult juggle to try to get pretty much anybody in. It's going to be a tough proposition for anybody that's trying to build a team right now.
Yeah, that's kind of the dilemma that Boston has faced.
Right.
I know Laker fans hate the Celtics, so I'm not going to go too much into Boston, but I don't want to go off topic here. But at the trade deadline, people were killing them for not making a move and trying to improve their roster. But I think you look at the team, and I think they were looking at the roster and saying, even if we make a move, our team isn't good enough to win a championship. I know Laker fans will like that. I think they honestly, you have to make those tough calls sometimes. And, do you give up the Brooklyn pick, let's say, and maybe landing a guy like Fultz or Ball and give up maybe a decade of that player's career to finish, with an Eastern Conference Finals loss or a Finals loss, that best case scenario, or I think that's what you have to ask yourself. You have to look at the other contenders around the league and what their window is, and if a title is realistic, really. And if you're a team that's rebuilding, it's really tough right now to see a path to a championship in the next few years, and that's why the longer approach could make sense if you can't land multiple stars. I know that kind of contradicts what I was saying earlier. Obviously you want to have that first star that can attract other stars, but really the best case scenario for the Lakers, I would say, is finding that star in this year's draft and then having that guy develop and attract another star maybe next offseason or in a trade where a guy like George comes over or someone like that potentially. It's unfortunate what happened at the end of the year, but if they can land that pick, that would be a huge, huge bonus for them.
Right, and that's ultimately. I'm glad you brought up Boston. I want to get to that in just a second here, but But that's ultimately, I think, where I'm at with the whole Paul George situation, is that I would take, if depending on what George's camp is saying, if he says I'm coming to LA when I'm a free agent in 2018, then I think you stand pat. You hope that that you keep your pick here this summer, and then next thing you know, you bring in Paul George, and you've got Paul George and all of these assets. You've got D'Angelo Russell, Brandon Ingram, Julius Randle, Lonzo Ball, Markelle Fultz, or Josh Jackson, or whoever you got in the draft. You've got all these pieces around him, and then if you need to make some trades and work some things out to make a team really fit around George, then you've got the pieces that can do it. And looking at what happened with the Knicks and Carmelo Anthony, that's one of those things that comes to mind when I think about that situation. And so that's got me more on the side of being a little bit careful with what the Lakers do with their assets this summer. I'm not necessarily fully on board with trading all the young pieces just yet. And talking about a team like Boston, I think they've got so many assets. They've got so many picks, whether it's from the Nets or wherever. I know they've got a number of different picks that they can move, that even if they move a few away in a deal for a star and something blows up, something doesn't work, they still are in a pretty good spot, and they're still going to have a decent amount of future assets. Whereas with the Lakers, they don't, because of that Dwight Howard trade and that Steve Nash trade. Their future assets are a little bit limited. And so whatever move they make, they have to be really, really certain that it's the right one. There's really no margin for error with the Los Angeles Lakers.
No pressure, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think you're right. I think you want to have flexibility, and that's what a team like Boston has right now. That's what some of these other rebuilding teams have. They have some cap space, they have picks, and I think that flexibility allows you to decide, okay, do we want to make a move right now, or should we just kind of let this team run its course and go young? Should we move off some of our veterans for other assets? You have to look at all those different things. I think a team like Boston has some tough decisions to make, because they have a lot of guys that are on smaller contracts too. If you look at guys like Isaiah Thomas, Avery Bradley, Jay Crowder. Crowder is under contract for a while, but those are guys that next few years are going to be up for new deals. So you have to wonder, okay, they're going to get to a point where they have veteran. Do you keep those veterans and keep this core together and try to build around this core and make it better? But like people were saying at the trade deadline, go out and try to add a shot blocker, add a better rebounder, add some pieces, or do you say, okay, we're going to trade off some of these guys and kick the can down the road? I know that's kind of what they've been mocked for, pushing their title window, down the road, and getting more picks and more picks and more picks. But do you consider that with how many talented teams there are right now? I think if you look 5 years from now, Golden State is probably that team is probably not going to be the same. Cleveland, we're already seeing they're taking a step backward. Like you said, San Antonio is never going anywhere because Greg Popovich is a wizard. But these other teams, I think you do have to look at that and consider it seriously.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so glad you said the word flexibility, because I've actually got a question here about the Lakers and their own flexibility. And by the way, you're on the money with Boston. Their fans are definitely getting more frustrated, it seems like, every time they don't make a trade, because everybody's been expecting one for so long. I mean, they went ballistic during the draft when Boston selected Jaylen Brown and didn't trade for a star. And then they were getting impatient again at the deadline. So they're definitely going to be a team to watch. And I know that if the Lakers do pursue a trade for a guy like George or whoever, Boston's going to be their chief competition, because we know that Danny Ainge has a ton of picks that he can throw into just about any deal. Now, looking at what the Lakers have available, it's kind of a tricky situation, because the Lakers went and signed Timofey Mozgov and Luol Deng last summer, and they signed them to those huge deals. And they're eating up a lot of their cap space. I mean, you're looking at about $32 million in cap space that these two guys are eating up. And so that means that if the Lakers let Nick Young go, which it sounds like from the exit interviews, it kind of sounds like he wants to move on to a playoff contender, which that's fine. So he'll probably opt out of his deal and he'll sign elsewhere. So that would leave them, if they keep David Nwaba and Tarik Black, that would leave them just under the ability to offer a max deal. They would have about $24 million or so, and a max contract would be just above that, or it'd be very, very close. they'd be extremely close to it. And that's for a max contract for a guy with 6 years experience or less. So if they wanted a true veteran guy, they would really have to make some serious moves in order to go after some of these guys in free agency. And so I think one of the things that we're going to have to watch this summer for the Lakers is Tarik Black. And Tarik Black has a non-guaranteed deal. The decision has to be made by the 4th of July. And he has a $6.6 million player option for next season, or not player option, but non-guaranteed deal for next season. So the Lakers have to decide, do they want to keep him and pay him $6.6 million, or do they want to let him go, knowing that they would be able to then chase after a higher level of max free agent. Now, of course, other moves can be made and things like that, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it because it does seem like it's going to be a pretty important decision for the Lakers, and that the timing of it is interesting. That 4th of July is the deadline. I mean, that's right when free agency is really booming. So what are your thoughts on Tarik Black and what the Lakers should do there?
Well, I think fortunately for the Lakers, that is a good time for them because I think they'll be able to kind of read the market a little bit. Some of these options come up sooner and you don't have a chance to see, what your team could potentially do. So I think, we see even before July 1st, teams kind of get an idea of who's interested, and then July 1st comes, they start making contact and all that. So by the 4th of July, you're going to know, do you have a shot at landing, one guy? Do you have a shot at landing two guys below the max, going after multiple free agents, guys that are going to be a little bit cheaper than the max, but going out and signing more than one guy or potentially three guys, depending on how much they're making. I think you're going to have a better idea of that. But honestly, I think I'm leaning toward right now not keeping him if I'm the Lakers. He's going to be 26 years old this next season. He's someone that I'm not sure, I haven't seen enough from him to say, okay, he's worth $6.6 million next year. And I think I'd rather have that cap space, right, either in the offseason to make those kind of signings potentially, or I think, I just think that the only way I see myself keeping him is if you're not having much luck in free agency, then you just say, okay, well, we're not, we're going to have cap space anyway that we can't really use, or, we're not going to use all our cap space. We don't need to free up that $6.6 million. And then he's a free agent the following summer. You can keep him for one more year and kind of evaluate him and see if you want to sign him to a long-term deal. And then, that makes sense. But I'm just, as of right now, I don't think I've seen enough for him to say that he's worth $6.6 million. And if you do have to, if you're uncertain about whether or not you can sign multiple free agents or sign a max free agent, then, by July 4th, then I think you have to let him go and try to chase after that.
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting situation. It's gonna be a little bit tough because like you said, I mean, there's gonna be free agents out there that the Lakers may be pursuing. Maybe they don't have a great feel by the 4th of July, and so they end up having to let Black go. And looking at the Lakers roster, they've got Timofey Mozgov, they have Ivica Zubac, and so you've got two centers there, and Black doesn't really have the range to play power forward much, so kind of makes it a tough place to try to find him minutes. But I can say that he's also just an amazingly fascinating person. He's a leader in every sense of the word. He's just got a great character, just a strong person. He's a great guy to have around younger players. I mean, he just earned his master's degree. He is starting a youth foundation in Memphis. He's aware of the impact that he can have as a basketball player. He's also interested in life beyond basketball. He's preparing for his career after basketball is over. He's doing all these really impressive things and really showing what it means to be a professional. So he's the kind of guy you want around the team. But like you said, they may want that flexibility this summer. And so I lean more towards keeping him. But again, if say Gordon Hayward calls up the Lakers and suddenly says, "Hey, I'm interested in a max deal," then I mean, unfortunately, I think you kind of have to part ways with him, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to. It'd be really tough to justify keeping him over, the potential, the possibility of landing a guy like Hayward or whoever if one of those guys call. And I think having those guys around the team is so important. I don't want to diminish that. I think it is very important to have those kind of guys for culture and have those guys around a team, guys that are a bit older and guys that can be leaders. I just interviewed John Wall recently, and he talked about how early on in Washington, he had to really try hard to stay positive and try to learn from the veterans that were on the team and try to not get accustomed to losing, because they were kind of a laughingstock when he got to the Wizards before, they were able to put some pieces around him and become a contender. So I think if you're a guy like that, or a guy like Steph Curry in Golden State early on, these guys talk about having to go through those rough seasons early on and then, coming out the other side of it. And they really credit those veterans who, helped them stay positive and helped them kind of build that winning culture. I think you saw that in Oklahoma City when they had, KD and Russ and James Harden and Serge Ibaka. They talked about Kevin Ollie being so important, and, Derek Fisher and guys like that. So I think every young team needs those guys. The question is, do you keep a guy like Black at $6.6 million if that's the main thing he's bringing? There's so many guys around the NBA that can provide that, maybe on a veteran minimum contract or a smaller contract, and then you don't have to risk missing out on a star to have that on your team. So I do think that's very important, but I think you have to, find the right value for a guy like that. If it's a guy that's on a minimum contract, then that's obviously amazing. You want to grab that guy and have him in the locker room around your young guys. I think what Black has done off the court is great. I think he's shown on the court too that he's better than most people expected. He's obviously exceeded all expectations from when he first got here in LA. So I think it's a tough decision, but again, $6.6 million is where it's really tough for me.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that the unfortunate reality is that those contracts they gave Deng and Mozgov last summer have made it so tough to keep a guy like Black, who you really would like to see stick around. But I mean, Deng and Mozgov are partially already being paid for their veteran presence. I mean, that's part of their salaries, is for them to be not necessarily just producing on the court, even though they've been lacking in that area, but they're also there to be role models and mentors off the floor. And so that may kind of be eating up Black's role a little bit as well. Now, you know what? I'm glad that you mentioned the John Wall interview you did. I've noticed that you've got a few high-profile interviews in the last week here, in the last few days. I mean, you've got Jeff Teague, John Wall, and then you were able to talk to Blake Griffin, it looks like, as well. What did you take away from those? Can you tell us a little bit about that whole process?
The first one I ran was Blake Griffin, and I was kind of talking to him about this Clippers team and what they have to do in order to compete for a championship this year and go deep in the playoffs, because that's what this team was built for. Obviously, whenever they put this group together, and then it was interesting talking to him about how long this team's been together, because he kind of talked about it. He said we're a group that's been together for a long time now, 5-6 years, and we found a lot of different ways to lose. He was very blunt about it. And he talked about them having to step up, and then he also talked a little bit about free agency too. I thought it was interesting. He was talking about he basically said he was curious what it would be like to enter a season as a player that was on an ending contract, and then he said, he basically told everyone in his life, I don't want to talk about free agency at all, and really the distraction kind of went away. And it's pretty interesting. In past years, whenever guys have been heading into free agency, and the Clippers have a number of guys with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin and JJ Redick. Sometimes a team can have one star player, entering free agency. It's like, a huge circus. I think it's pretty interesting that LA hasn't had that become a distraction, even though, all these guys are kind of, free agency's coming up. I think there is a sense of urgency, and they have gotten some questions about it here and there, but I think they've done a pretty good job managing it. That's kind of what I took away from the Griffin one. The Wall one, I thought that was really interesting because I first interviewed John Wall whenever actually he played his first NBA game in Orlando, his rookie debut. And I've interviewed him a number of times since then, and he's grown so much as a person, as a player, as a leader, and I kind of wanted to focus on that a little bit. And he kind of talked about that, how far he's come, what he kind of learned from those early days in Washington when they struggled, and then learning how to coexist with Bradley Beal. He admitted that there were times in past seasons where if Bradley Beal was having a huge game, he could not figure out a way to get his own shots and be as productive and complement Beal. And then he said if he would have a huge game, then Beal would run into the same problem. This is the first year they've really been able to coexist and have big games together. They both averaged the same number of points, 23.1 points per game. So they really had breakout years together at the same time. And it was interesting kind of looking at his perspective on, Washington's turnaround and how far they've come and where they're at as a team now.
It's always cool to see players who grow like that. And that's kind of what I was getting at when we were talking about how hard it is to part with some of these players that you've been watching over the years and watching them grow and develop and everything, because you sort of you develop that relationship with them, and you've gotten to see John Wall change over the years, and now he's had an absolutely phenomenal season. And the Wizards have been looking very good. I mean, they're kind of, this season they were the team that everybody thought they were going to be last season, right? When everybody thought they were going to take that big step forward, and then they were going to be a major contender for Kevin Durant, and it just didn't happen last season. And then this year they've kind of really blown up. And you're right about the whole Blake Griffin thing. Like, how is that not a bigger storyline? Griffin and Paul being free agents at the same time. I mean, that's Doc Rivers has said that he wants everybody to come back and everything, but you got to wonder if the Clippers flame out early again in the playoffs, like let's say they only get to the second round or something like that, will those guys, Griffin and Paul, will they start maybe thinking the grass might be greener somewhere else and start to look elsewhere? Did you get any sense of that, or Griffin is? I'm sure he's pretty much just kind of shut down any talk of that sort of thing and is just focused on the playoffs right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, he said basically it would be, disrespectful to his team, to the coaches, to the fans, everyone, to kind of focus on free agency. And he pointed out that these guys prepare all season long and all off season. They spend so much time working on their game for this time of year. So to be distracted and thinking about free agency, it just doesn't make much sense. You're obviously going to wait till the playoffs are over. And he said, too, he's like, I can't focus on a decision that I can't make right now. Even if he wants to think about free agency and look at different teams, that it's not like you can decide anything or you can talk to teams or anything like that. You really can't do much. So I think it's something that guys think about throughout the year. There's no question about it. And I think it's something that guys talk to their agent about and talk to their families about. But I don't think it's something that is something that they want to be a distraction. I did ask him if other players have tried recruiting him, because I think that that happens more than people think. I think every year at the All-Star break, you kind of hear a little bit about it, where some guys talk about getting recruited, or I think recently actually Kemba Walker came out and said that he would love to see Blake Griffin in Charlotte, and that's kind of what made me ask the question, because Kemba brought him up and mentioned him by name, but he said no player has talked to him, and he feels like it's because guys respect that he doesn't want to talk about it. He's made that pretty clear. So guys know coming to him right now is just going to piss him off, to be honest. And you have a better shot of recruiting him in the offseason, if anything. But no, I mean, I think if anyone's going to leave there, if one of those guys, if we're talking about Blake or I think Chris is probably more likely to stay. And that may seem surprising because he's a bit older, but I think you have to consider the fact that, he has his family kind of rooted there. And, Blake, I think it's easier if he wants to just move on to a new team. If he wants to go to, say, let's say Boston, or, if they don't get Gordon Hayward or whatever, and he goes to a team like Boston, or I don't know, name the team. It's easier, I think, for him to make a move like that just because it affects less people. Whereas I think someone like Chris Paul, having roots in LA and, getting to the big market he wanted to get to, and having those relationships too, where you've been with Doc Rivers for years now. And, I think you can still find ways to, make changes to the core and change the roster and try to tweak it and try to contend, go after different guys. But I just think it's very possible both those guys are back, but it's also possible that, one of them moves on, or both of them move on, honestly. I don't have a great read on it. This is all speculation, but it's going to be interesting to see this summer.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a very interesting offseason. I mean, it always is. There's always all kinds of things happening during the NBA offseason, which is great. I mean, it gives us plenty to talk about, that's for sure. You said Blake is one of those guys who may look to go someplace else, and you also have to figure, he doesn't know anything other than the Clippers. I mean, that's the team he's been with since he was a rookie. So depending on the deals that are on the table and everything, there's always that kind of feeling where he could be looking around and saying, well, I haven't tried being with a different team or in a different organization, so maybe he kind of looks elsewhere. And the same goes for Paul George and some of these other guys, Jimmy Butler, guys who, Butler obviously would have to be traded, but guys who are going to be at least coming up on free agency that are stuck with one team. Of course, the NBA has changed the rules in the new collective bargaining agreement so they can be offered more than anybody else. If you're a max player and you're with the team that just originally drafted you, you can make a lot more money anyway. But it's definitely going to be a storyline to watch. And from a Lakers perspective, of course, the Lakers are hoping that some players do change teams and that some of them do pick to just come to the Lakers. Who knows? Maybe Blake Griffin decides that he just wants to change locker rooms. You never know, right?
And honestly, I was actually going to say with Blake, the thing with him is he doesn't have any, family holding him down exactly. But, like you said, he's been in LA his entire career. He's seen the benefits of LA. He's seen the marketing benefits. He's seen the different show business benefits where he's gotten to do some stuff in comedy and gotten to do some stuff on TV. And, he's been linked to Space Jam and, you name it. He's seen what LA can do for you. So, maybe he does end up staying there and seeing that, because he obviously played, college in Oklahoma. And, I think he understands that when you're in LA, that it definitely has its perks, and maybe he won't want to leave. Honestly, I don't know. But I do think with him. I think that's the kind of thing to look at. The different off-court opportunities that he's gotten since being a Clipper, and honestly, like you said, when you're with the same team for that long, it is tough to leave. It's not like some of these guys that are on their fourth or fifth team, leaving that first team that drafted you. Some of these guys feel extremely loyal to that team just because they took a shot on them. And if you're a guy like Blake, they drafted number 1 overall. He knows people that have been there since day one, the organization with him. And you've kind of seen the franchise go from being really bad to really good. So, it's always really tough. It's going to be really hard for it's always tough for a free agent to leave. And I think those are some of the factors to keep in mind with Blake. But like you said, there is another team in LA, so we shall see.
Yeah, never know. Maybe he'll be wearing purple and gold. We'll see. So before we let you get out of here, I always ask for some kind of a cool story. And actually, you've already given us a few here with your conversations with Blake Griffin and John Wall and everything. I think last time you were on the show, you told us a very awesome story about your interactions with Steve Francis. And him, you walked into the parking lot with him when you were just breaking into the whole business and everything, and it was really, really cool to hear his impact that he had on you, and especially considering that at the time he was a star level player. So, do you have any other stories for us today of just interactions with players or anything like that?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind, and it's very relevant for this show. I actually got to know really early on. I think I was 16 years old. I got to know Kobe Bryant's publicist, and I emailed back and forth with her. Her name was Catherine, for about a year, and I was trying to see, if there was a way I could get a phone interview with Kobe or have a chance to sit down with him for a few minutes. And I just kept kind of pitching her different article ideas and things like that, and different interview topics that I kind of had in mind. And then I remember she reached out to me at one point and said, can you be in Orlando during the Lakers off day? And it was like a few days beforehand, so I didn't have much notice. So actually, I was 16 years old. I was working at Kmart at the time, and my boss was a huge jerk. And I had to go to him and ask if I could get my shift covered, and he was like, absolutely not. And I said, well, I showed him the email, and I said, I have a chance to interview Kobe Bryant, and he was a big basketball fan. He's like, okay, go. So that was the only time that boss was ever nice to me. So I go to Orlando, and I get a chance. He was doing something with. He was actually getting a key to the city, which is really weird. Looking back, it's a really weird thing. I don't really get that. He's not like, it's not like he's from Orlando or anything. He did a lot of community work, I guess, in Orlando. So, and just throughout, different cities in the area, or communities in the area. I don't know. He got a key to the city for some reason, and they filled the arena up with like kids from different schools from all around the area. So I remember just walking out and through the tunnel, and it was like louder than most Magic games now, because I mean now the team's so bad, but it was an arena full of kids, so it was just kind of crazy, the noise. And standing in the tunnel, I'm thinking like, who else could, what other player could do this kind of thing, fill an arena like this on an off day, get a key to the city in a random city. Like, there were just so many like crazy things about it. And then I got a chance to actually talk to him, and I wrote an article about his community the different stuff that he did in the community, and his service, and his off-court impact. And then also I remember talking to him about that, talking about what made him want to be a leader in the community, and what made him want to do stuff like that. And when he really realized he wanted to do that, and he talked about seeing the impact that his dad had whenever he was a player. And that, he always said if he could follow in his footsteps and be a player, he wanted to have that same impact. So it was a cool interview. I mean, I loved it. I was nervous as hell. I think if you're 16 years old and you're a basketball fan and you walk up to Kobe Bryant and get a chance to talk to him, you're going to be nervous as hell. You're not a basketball fan if you're not nervous that first time you see Kobe in person. Like, I was like freaking out. Butterflies in my stomach, nervous, feel like I'm going to throw up. Luckily I didn't. Interview went well, and then I wrote the article, and to this day, I'm friends on Facebook with that publicist. She's since moved on. She's not even in PR anymore. But yeah, I mean, I definitely owe her, because that was a huge kind of opportunity for me. And then I definitely think that made every other interview after that easier, because when you talk to Kobe, then it's tough to get bigger than Kobe. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
There's not many guys like, aside from a Michael Jordan or seeing some of these other legends. It's tough to I grew up watching Kobe. I'm 25 years old. You know what I mean? Like, that's a guy that I looked up to. So I think that was a huge moment for me. And it's just a fun story that I've been able to tell friends and stuff too. And I was really lucky to be able to have the opportunity.
Very cool. While you were telling that story there, which, I mean, that's crazy that you were able to I mean, after a year, finally get in front of him and get the interview and everything. That's awesome. And then I tried to figure out, just using Google while we're talking here, I tried to figure out why he got a key to the city of Orlando, and I couldn't find it, but I did find that February 7th, 2008, Kobe Bryant receives a key to the city of Orlando. And it doesn't give a reason why, but it does mention that this was 7 months before Dwight Howard got a key to the city of Orlando, and then 16 months before the Lakers Game 5 win in Orlando over the Magic. So kind of funny the way that all worked out. Like, Kobe actually got a key to Orlando before Dwight Howard, who was like the star in Orlando
that's what I mean.
at that time.
It didn't make sense. Like, they announced it and everything. I was in the building that day, and I was waiting for them to kind of explain it, and it never really did. And I love that there's no even like trace of it on the internet being able to tell why he got it. I still to this day don't know. I covered the event and I don't know, so I can't tell you. But I didn't realize he got one before Dwight Howard. That's pretty funny, actually.
It's like the Miami Heat retiring Michael Jordan's number, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's you just one of those things. I wasn't gonna say no to it, and it was a cool event. He, like I said, he packed the arena, and kids is screaming in an arena like that. It's pretty crazy. A full arena, so it was a cool event. But yeah, I still have no idea to this day what it was for. That was one of the stranger ones. I don't know, but it was very cool. I got a cool interview out of it. I remember, I think he actually hurt his finger like right before that too. So people were like wondering if he was gonna play in the All-Star game. There were some like questions about that too. So I got some like answers about that and got a chance to ask about that stuff too. So I mean, he was really, really good. I mean, Kobe's one of those guys that if you don't talk basketball with him, then you're not really sure what you're going to get. So I wasn't sure how he would kind of do with some of these other like off-court questions, but he handled it really well, and he was awesome. I know later in his career, he really shut down everything non-basketball. It was really tough to get a good answer out of him that wasn't basketball related, but talking about him being like a veteran leader and that kind of stuff. But no, it was awesome. I mean, he was terrific.
Very cool. Well, as always, I mean, just another phenomenal story, Alex. We certainly appreciate that. Before we get out of here, do you have anything coming up? I mean, I know you mentioned the video that you're doing on Rob Pelinka and his relationship with other agents. Anything else that people should be on the lookout for?
I have another video. I think it's going up tomorrow. Actually, it'll probably be up when this is up. It's about free agents that can help their stock in the playoffs. not guys that are, going to be max contract guys. We know those guys are going to get paid, but, the mid-tier guys that could really help themselves with a good playoff run and some strong play. And then I have a number of interviews that are going to drop in the next week. Guys that are either upcoming free agents or still playing the postseason. And I have a number of Q&As and feature stories that are going to drop with a number of different players. So I'll be tweeting all of those out at Alex Kennedy NBA. And all my work is on hoopshype.com. So I'll be sharing those stories a lot in the next over the next few weeks. I'll be having a lot of content coming out.
Awesome. Any Lakers in that group of interviews that you have coming out?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think.
I know you always have some great interviews with Larry Nance.
Yeah, he was. I had the article that ran on him about what it's like being a Laker, and I mean that was a lot of fun talking to him about that. I'm sure I'll catch up with him at some point over the offseason. I think I'm trying to think if there's any Lakers that I have that are coming up. I don't think I have any Lakers that are. Because I've reached out to a number of guys and I'm like trying to schedule interviews right now, and I have a few that I've already done. A few guys that are coming up will be CJ McCollum, Nerlens Noel. I'm trying to think of some draft prospects that are going to be the 2017 draft. But then there's a few guys that I'm kind of waiting on trying to schedule, or I've been trying to get on the phone with them for a few days now, so I'm not really sure. But those are the guys right now that are kind of next up in line for me. But this offseason, I should have some more Lakers content.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, hey, thanks a lot for coming on the show. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. That was Alex Kennedy from hoopshype.com. Always great stuff. Always great to catch up with him. That's going to about wrap things up for today. As always, we're hoping for some lottery luck on May 16th. You can find this show on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, the CLNS radio app, and of course, LakersNation.com. My name is Trevor Lane, and this is CourtCast by Lakers Nation.